Welcome to the GPLama YouTube channel, where today's video may be a little longer than it needs to be because I have to cover my testing protocol in more detail than usual, in an attempt to stop company representatives posting comments such as, yeah, the kind of problem GPLama mentioned has absolutely no impact on normal cycling. Now I can assure you I am a normal cyclist doing normal cycling things, and this is why they're working on a fix for that meter. Anyhow, today's focus is on the unexpected behaviour of the XCadey XPower-S Gen 2 Spider power meter. This is another budget level power meter that I've had a number of requests to put through my testing protocol in recent weeks. Now, I've been familiar with XCadey for many years now, first reviewing their single-sided crank power meter back in 2018. In 2020, I reviewed their XPower Spider Gen 1. That took a little bit of work to get reporting accurately. I think it needed scaling up a little bit. And then 5 years on from that, I finally got my hands on their Gen 2 Spider power meter. Now, this was first launched back in 2022, so it's not a new power meter, but XCadey have recently launched their Ventus carbon cranks and power meter combo, which has given the meter some renewed attention. Pulling up the technical specifications, it's a Spider power meter with a huge range of options. Now, in a time where we see most companies consolidate their options into just a few, which are Shimano, Rogue, Tubular, XCadey still have a ton of options on the market, which suits a number of bottom brackets, chain rings, crank sets, and you name it. Power accuracy, looking at plus or minus 1%, wireless protocols, ANT+, Bluetooth, and everything else you'd expect to see from a budget Spider power meter. Battery life up to 150 hours with the rechargeable battery, with the companion app doing firmware updates, power scaling, and showing real-time data, which I make use of a little later in the video. 2-year warranty, and there's no mention of Auto Zero in the spec sheet or any sign of it during my testing. It may have it, I don't know. Price-wise, the Gen 2 Spider comes in at US $329. The Ventus carbon cranks with the Spider power meter comes in at $539 with no rings. With 170mm cranks and Dura-Ace 12-speed 5236 rings, this comes in at 647 grams on my scales. The setup there would be around $730 depending on where you source your rings from. The 24mm spindle made the installation very easy on a 12-speed Shimano Rogue group set, and the spaces you need will likely depend on the bottom bracket used, with the preload collar doing the final touches. They do mention in the manual that you need to perform a few short, hard efforts prior to calibration, so that was performed before getting stuck into the Lama lab test indoors. And those with a keen eye for detail would know that this is not the full Lama lab test because it didn't quite get through the initial few tests. So in the testing setup we have here the XCadey on the bike, fully updated, fully zeroed, Asioma Pro RS as the reference meter on the bike, and the control and another source of power is the Garmin Tax Neo 3M Smart Trainer. Now, the initial few short, hard tests here weren't good enough. I needed to sprint over 1,000 watts to, well, I don't know really what happened there. It dropped 40 watts. Maybe that was the initial bedding in, I don't know. But right here, I have 109, 150, 149. So we dropped almost 40 watts out of the atmosphere on that test there. Okay, let's just say that was the bedding in. Next up, another test, and that was just riding along, short, hard sprint, and the offset changed again. Let's ignore the dropout for now. That was with the XCadey dropout, but we were, what, 96, 100, 99. So the Asioma Pro RS and the Garmin Tax Neo, all throughout this data set, are exactly where I'd expect them. The Tax Neo does not have compensation for any drivetrain loss, so it should be a smidgen under the Asioma Pro RSs. That's what we're seeing. The XCadey should be very close to the Asioma Pro RSs. Not quite there, but close. Post that sprint though, yeah, things changed. 202, 188. So we've got a separation now in the other way of 14 watts. So about 12 or 13 minutes in, I could tell something wasn't quite right. So down the rabbit hole we go. Zero offset performed here, more riding along that short, sharp sprint there was just a little bit too short, but into the Lama lab test protocol. Okay, so the small ramp steps, very low wattage, 116, 116, 113. That's how I'd expect things to play out. Everything is good, what I would call crystal cranking, just riding along very easily. All right, stress test starts now. 200 watt steady state, controlled by the Tax Neo. 204.79, not too bad, in the right direction. Asioma's 200, Garmin Tax Neo 3M 199. Remember those numbers right there, 204, 200, 199. They're important because we do a lot of 200 watt testing throughout this test. 250 watt steady state, again consistent, reading a little higher, 257 on the XCadey's, Asioma and Tax Neo, very, very close. Into the sprint, overshooting a little bit in the sprint with the XCadey. Well, actually by a little bit, I mean probably a little bit too much to be comfortable. You can see that the Favero and the Neos are very, very, very close. but it's what happens after that. Returning to 200 watt steady state, now it was 204, 200, 199 were our three numbers. Now we've got 212, 200, 199. One of those things is doing something different, and that's the XCadey. Again, that shift in offset. Stopped, zeroed, just the XCadey power meter, returned to 200 watt steady state, and now we have 191. So we've gone 212 down to 191. Aciomas and Garmin Tax Neos, I'll keep repeating myself there, very, very close. No zeros performed on those. And then I stopped. I zeroed all meters just to be sure. Well, the two bike power meters, you can't zero a 3M. And we are now at 204, 200, 199. Right, whew, that was a lot of zeroing. That was a lot of massaging that power meter to get back to where it was 3 200 watt tests ago. Okay, another hard sprint performed. Wasn't too bad indoors for the sprint. And then two small steady states again at 200 watts. And look, things changed just a little bit. 209, remember our special numbers. 209, 200, 199. I don't even need to include the Aciomas and Garmin Tax Neos. We know what they're going to be. What did the XCadey say? 209 for that, stopped, zeroed it again, and 207. So it moved a little bit. The other two, I'm not going to mention because they remain the same. And that's pretty much where things stopped. I was seeing inconsistencies indoors. Now, indoors is a perfect environment. The bike isn't doing this, there's no vibrations. If this was happening indoors, then what was going to happen outdoors? And I thought, okay, I'm going to pull up stumps there on the indoor testing now. I'm not going to complete the full Lama lab test. We'll get some data outside first and see how things behave there. And just a word of warning, outdoors things got a lot worse from the get-go. Now, I'm including almost the full test as proof that I'm not doing anything out of the ordinary. Yes, I'm a regular cyclist doing regular cycling things. I'll put chapters in this video below if you want to jump ahead just to the quick data review and not the outdoor stuff. Knock yourself out, but hold tight. Alrighty, here we are for the outdoor testing of the Gen 2 XCadey power meter. I have the Acima Pro RS's on, same as the indoor setup. Both meters were zeroed just as I left the garage, well before I left the garage, so temperature stable. On the ride out here, which has been 22 minutes, I have a very different average power. The Acima Pro RS reporting 184 watts, the Gen 2 XCadey 202 watts. Now in loading the app from XCadey, I can see there's a positive offset. So indicating it's going to be reading higher because it has a positive offset. Now there is no option to enable or disable auto zero, so I'm not quite sure if the Gen 2 XCadey has auto zero. It's not in any of these specs. What we can test though is a back pedal. Typically that's 5 back pedals on some power meters, others it's just simple coasting. Okay, the Aciomas went to sleep. The offset remains the same at 11 to 12, so it's going to be reading higher. Okay, so from the head unit, I will do a 0 offset, and we watch that go to 0 on the app, yes, okay. So there was some residual torque just riding along. And for completeness, I'll 0 the Aciomas as well. So we are in a complete 0 state for both power meters. Okay, successful, done. Back. There we go, and I'll lap on this. Okay, average power showing, average power showing. Okay, there's a lot going on here. It shouldn't take too long to confirm what's going on. If I can clip in. Alrighty. So what I'm expecting now is that both units have been zeroed and should be stable. So we should see, well, ideally within 2%, shouldn't we? And you weren't too far off. Okay, 40. Now that average will be a little different early on because depending on which power meter woke up first. But just rolling along, we're still a few watts now low on the XCadey. And the longer we go, the more accurate the data will be for those averages. 146, 139, 150, 146. Okay, so we are reading lower. And it's not just a time lag, okay? We'll do a small peak power sprint coming up. Car back, I'll get it done before the car comes. All right, we continue to have a look at the maximums on that. Wow. They are very different maximums. However, the 2 meters after that sprint aren't too far off. There's a few watts in it, but not too much. Maybe you brought it into line. All right, we'll have a close look at the numbers. Around the corner, it's a bit windy, so we'll slow down, right. Okay, so if I coast, the offset goes to 0. Excellent. Oh, -2, -1. Let me be thorough and stop that. Go back to the 0 point. And we have 0 offset, perfect. Okay, so no residual torque on that sprint, although the sprint was extremely low on the XCadeys. All right. I'll swap screens here. So we can have a look at cadence as it occurs. Where are we? Here, right. All right, so same type of information on the screen there. Power balance, which is always going to be an estimate from the XCadey cadence, which we can see in the data later on anyway. 3-second power, 10-second power, 30-second power. And as I'm riding, well, in the small ring, we've got a different number again. Okay, so I coast. And now we're at a -15 offset. Oh my word. I stop. And now we've got a -13 offset. It didn't even require me to sprint. So I will do a calibration on the app. That will go to 0. Successful. Okay, no worries. And we'll try again. Next sprint will be in the small ring. We'll really ramp it up. And now with that 0, I'm guessing it's going to be more in line with the axiomas, and it is. All right, something different again. Okay, in all of that, we are now very, very even between the 2 meters. So, if it were to remain there, I'd be happy, but I'll continue testing. So we're very, very close now. That's in a small ring. Just riding along. Those numbers are brilliant right now. But as I've seen with this meter, things shift. And that's where the problems lie. All right. I'll wait for around the corner here. I've got a bit more kick upwards. Okay, small ring sprint, gonna spin this one out pretty quickly. Hopefully with over 1,000 watts. That's where strange things happen. Okay, I'll lap this just to be thorough. Sprint again, it's gonna be pretty quick. All right. I'll keep it in the small ring, so I'll put the brakes on. XCadey, completely missed that one again. You are now reading a little lower. Oh my word. Okay, I expect the offset to be in the negatives. After that sprint, we'll check again, same spot as before. So we've gone from, it was reading perfectly until that peak power sprint, 1005 watts. Okay, now I expect that offset within their app to be in the negatives. We'll get that to the 0 point. -2. There we go. I don't need too much more data from out here, but I'll continue my ride. That concludes all I need to know out here. That's replicated that issue twice. I'll probably do it 3 or 4 more times with cameras off, and we'll look at the data. But it doesn't take long to diagnose good versus bad. Okay, so that's the out on the road real-time analysis that I do when riding the bike, and it wasn't really hard to see that things weren't quite right. Here's the data resulting from that. That first 20 minutes that I discussed early in the video was extremely ugly. Again, this power meter was zeroed in the garage where everything was temperature stable, and then out riding, things were off. 201 on the XCadey, 186 on the Axiomas, with a number of dropouts as well. On the XCadey, that's not looking good, but that was very ugly early on. And this section here through here is what we saw in video before as I was performing that out on the road. Let's dive into, well, first of all, just the sprint section through here at 33.26, and that's what we're seeing on the head units. If you go back and pause the video at the right spot, you'll see that data. I do have 3-second averaging on though. On the head units from the app, it should be, well, what was happening. Cadence-wise for that first sprint, no surprises there. It's the cadence that's dropping out. So the cadence sensor on these units, when giving it the beans, doing a full epic sprint, just drops out, making it falsely report what you're doing. Next sprint, again, well under in the sprints, 1005 watts, 1272 from the Axiomas. Scrolling down to the cadence of that sprint, yeah, that's a bit of a problem there. Look, I can't make this data up. That's me doing normal things. Normally I sprint on a bike. The Axiomas coming to the party. This one stayed home. Following that, as I stopped the video and said I don't need any more data, I got more data. And it's still not pretty. One big ring sprint, really high torque, low cadence. The XCadey was able to keep up. It looked a little better there, but the offset's still taking place. Riding home, I was doing a few more short, sharp efforts because you might say, hey, 1,000 watts, I'm not touching over 1,000 watts, does this matter? Probably not. It was above 1,000 watts that I'd cause that offset to change. But speaking of change, this little section through here, probably just above me in this overlay, after doing a number of tests through here, that was all in the small ring. I changed to the big ring, bang, instant offset. So small ring to big ring, things changed. And we saw it out in the road, just riding along as well. Things just changed riding along. So anyhow, stopped again, zeroed everything, and just changed screens and rode home. And here's what we have for that. 214, 198 on the Axioma Pro RS. So not good, not good. Alrighty, so in summary there, look, I'll be the first to acknowledge that this was one single unit that I had on test, but rarely do I see one bad unit. The LLE EK01 was case in point last week, where I had some observations of one unit, swapped it over, and it was exactly the same with the other unit as well. So talking directly about my experience with this XPower Gen 2, the inconsistency was the problem. It made it extremely unreliable. If a meter is consistent but inaccurate, it can usually be scaled to be accurate. But this unit was changing its spots in real time during a ride, so it's absolute game over for trust. So a question you may be asking, and one that I'm asking, is why doesn't this stuff get picked up? This is not a new power meter, and I don't have answers for that. Like, I have read some comments from owners who have had similar experiences, but I need to talk about my own experience. Look, a 5 or maybe a 10% offset with no other reference power meter to compare to could easily be missed. Maybe you thought you had good legs that day. Maybe that extra shot of coffee was the cause of your new 20-minute PB. Or more likely, it was probably that offset changing after that town sign sprint you just did. Now sure, I could be more forgiving given this is a budget power meter at $329, but you need to double that, and now we're not talking about a budget power meter. I'll also admit my testing is becoming more detailed than it ever has before because access to good reference meters has never been better. Now while companies can make a power meter that when installed on a very expensive rig in their factory is accurate enough for them to stamp plus or minus 1% on it, but put that same power meter on a bike where it's designed to go and use it as it's designed to be used under normal cycling circumstances, and the results can change. Look, I start every review and every ride with a clean slate. The data will speak for itself. If I'm impressed, you'll know about it. If I'm not, I'll dig into the details so we're all a little more informed about what's going on. And maybe, depending on the company, they'll make a better product. And lastly, I'll leave with this. Getting power meters right is very, very hard, but that is the responsibility of the manufacturers who make them, not reviewers.